So today what we're going to learn about is the Torah itself, how it was given, why we think it's true, and how it operates. Okay? Because this is our life. Okay? So there are different ways of looking at the truth of Torah. I'm going to give you a few different angles. One is history. So how many of you think that, what's something that everybody would see? That Richard the Lionhearted actually once lived. How many think that there was somebody called Richard the Lionhearted of England?
I do.
She does.
So this is the moment where I get very embarrassed about my lack of English history knowledge.
Okay, so something more current. How many of you think that World War I actually occurred?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay? Okay, now you're saying you know. Do you know anybody who actually suffered through World War I? Probably not. So the first thing I want you to open your minds towards is when people say, only believe what I see, it's never true. Okay? So I'm going to contrast two things. World War I, that you will say you know happened. Do you know the story of Johnny Appleseed?
Yes.
Okay, so it's an American myth where there was somebody called Johnny Appleseed who had a big sack with apple seeds. He traveled throughout America throwing the seeds, and that's why there's so many apple trees in America, okay? Do any of you think this is true? No. You think? What? Okay, maybe when you're younger, you think, but now you don't. So I'm going to talk to you about why some things are viewed as historical facts and other things are not, okay? So for something to be viewed as a historical fact like World War I, the first thing is there has to be some documentary towards it. Like there are pictures of battles that were fought, novels that were written by people who suffered through the war, all sorts of history things, newspapers. Now, there's a lot written about Johnny Appleseed too. And there was a Walt Disney cartoon, and okay. So what makes documentation reliable is usually two things. It's written by serious people and written the time that it happened, not later, okay? So besides World War II, give me an example of anything else that you didn't see yourself, but you believe because of documentation.
Holocaust.
The Holocaust, although today you know there are still Holocaust survivors, so you could have a more direct experience there. How about the Roman Empire? None of us will ever meet anybody. You don't think so? Okay. So the Torah was documented immediately. It's the only religion in which more than one person is the source of the document. So I want to explain this. All other religions have basically the same story. There's somebody who's the enlightened person. Could be Jesus, could be Buddha, could be Muhammad. There's the enlightened person. The enlightened person gathers around him a small group of disciples who are very loyal. After the death of the enlightened person, the disciples transmit his message, and then it's written down. Okay, could you see where this is true of Christianity, of Islam, of Buddhism? Yeah? Okay, all religions have the same story in this regard. Okay, here's the story of Judaism. Vast numbers of people left Egypt. We're not talking about 10, we're not talking about 35, we're talking about vast numbers. Okay, when they came to Israel, they were all keeping Torah. We have lots of archaeological documentation for this. Vast numbers of people seem to have subscribed to the belief that God spoke to them. So Abraham Lincoln used to say this. He used to say you could fool all of the people some of the time. And you could fool some of the people all of the time. But you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Does that make sense to you? So if you have a large number of people, do you think you could convince them on a consistent basis that they eat man every day, but it doesn't fall on Shabbos? Could you convince thousands and thousands of people that this happens for like decades? Okay, so could you tell people that the sea split and they walked through it if they didn't? No. So this is the only religion that has a historical basis, meaning that it was documented at the same time that the events took place by serious people. So I attempt to be skeptical. I spent an entire afternoon in the Rockefeller Museum, which is near the Damascus Gate, where they have a large encyclopedia of philosophies and religion. And I wanted to check it out. Maybe there's another. There really isn't. They all have the same story of the enlightened individual, his group of disciples, and the creation of tradition much later. So this means it's a historic fact. So when did people stop seeing Torah as historically true?
When others created other religions.
Not really, because when you look at other religions, such as Christianity, they didn't say the Torah is not true. They just say, here's the Torah, and then the new improved version, okay, got this, because Israel didn't turn out to be such a good bargain after all. We'll start a new Israel under the leadership of, okay, yeah. But they didn't doubt Moshe, Sinai. That wasn't under doubt. It wasn't under doubt in Islam. Okay, it's only in the last 250 years that anybody serious questioned the historicity of Torah. When did this happen and under what circumstances? So I want to talk to you about the Enlightenment, and in order to talk about the Enlightenment, I have to go back and talk about the medieval era. The medieval era, which was when was that? What are we talking about?
1768.
Nah, earlier. That's the Renaissance, yeah. From 1300 to 1500. Yeah, the Dark Ages, okay, the medieval era. Why were they called the Dark Ages? What was dark about?
Because they weren't enlightened. Okay, Dark Ages, for example, they act like barbarians, right?
Yeah.
They didn't allow the concept of science, math, or other things beyond religion.
Right. That's exactly it. They were called the Dark Ages because all forms of light, of enlightenment, were forbidden. Enlightenment is like this. Pretend this room was really dark. Everything in the room would still be here, but you wouldn't see it. Enlightenment means the ability to see reality. They discouraged serious and critical observation of reality. Why?
Because people started asking questions.
So what's so bad about that?
Then when people ask questions, they'll know the truth. And when they know the truth, then they
What were they afraid of?
change.
They were afraid of change, and they were afraid of losing the authority of the church. So in the medieval era, literacy was discouraged, scientific experimentation was discouraged, all forms of learning were discouraged. The only people who had real learning behind them in that era were the monks in the monasteries. That's where the tradition of literacy was retained. I want to tell you how strong this was. They didn't even want the Bible translated from Latin into other languages. So even their own literature they viewed with askance. It's better the common people should not understand what it says in the Bible. This is what they thought. The reason for this is that Christianity is a religion of faith. And the way they thought then is that faith and enlightenment are two opposites. So they wanted to discourage this. Now, not coincidentally, because people are human and because in all societies there are people who are not so good, you had the rise of this, that since the whole civilization revolved around the church became wealthy and powerful. Do you know who the Borgia popes were? There were popes who were called the Borgia popes. They were from that family primarily, who were living lives of extraordinary luxury in the Vatican. They had many women. They had whatever they wanted in life. You understand this? So these are people who are telling ordinary monks to make vows of poverty, obedience, and celibacy, who were living lives very different. Came Martin Luther. What did he do?
Oh, he made a 91 something and he posted on the church.
Yeah.
And he put the 91 questions or something.
Yeah.
Posted on the church, and then controversy started.
Yeah, they was like, wait a minute, we don't believe in this nonsense. So that started the Reformation, which is in the 1500s. More or less simultaneously, you have the Renaissance. The Renaissance means the rebirth. Ooh, okay. Painting, literature, art, okay? Not just painting, statuary, all sorts of things. Okay, this is all a consequence of having lost faith in the church. This is clear? So now, in the mind of Christian Europe, the church equals what? Darkness. And secular thought equals light. Okay? So this is Renaissance thinking. The result of Renaissance thinking was that givens that the church had promoted, like the authority of the church itself, were questioned. So the French Revolution, okay, what are we talking about?
French Revolution, when the people riled up.
When are we talking about? I want to give you a timeline.
18...
No,
17?
14, yeah, okay. Yeah, late 1400s. Okay, the French Revolution,
14.
not to be confused with the American Revolution, which is when closer to what you're talking about. They promoted liberty, fraternity, equality, and part of their headset was despoiling the church. So the churches were literally despoiled. The vast holdings of the Catholic Church were taken away from them, given to the people. Okay. Okay. Now, the core of the Enlightenment was France. This didn't affect Jews. Want to know why? There were next to no Jews in France because they killed them all or expelled them. So this wasn't a Jewish problem. That was still during the time the church had more power. The Enlightenment went from France to England. Not a problem for Jews there either. Why not?
Because they killed them all.
Yeah. It went from there to Spain and Italy. Not a problem for the Jews there either. Why not?
They killed them all.
Inquisition. It was a little bit later. When was the Inquisition? I want you to have a timeline. 1492. The same year Columbus sailed the ocean blue were the Inquisition edicts. So it took a longer time until the Enlightenment reached Central and Eastern Europe. So this is why we're talking now about the 1700s, late 1700s, not even early 1700s. So where were Jews living at the time? European Jews. The Enlightenment did not touch, by the way, it didn't touch the Arab world, nor did the excesses of the church. They have a whole different history. Okay? So here we are in Germany. The Jews were observant, believed in the Torah, were not scholarly, okay, but they were believers. The Enlightenment reaches them. So when the Enlightenment reached Germany, one of the laws they met is the Jews no longer have to live in ghettos. They no longer have to be excluded from the trade guilds. Is this good news or bad news?
Bad news.
You say good news, you say bad news. Why is it good news?
They're not restricted anymore. They don't have to live in certain areas. They're not confined to extra laws that other people are affected by.
Yeah, they have much more freedom.
Yeah.
And they could have much more prosperity.
But they have much more exposure.
Much more exposure. And a funny thing happened psychologically. What happens psychologically is what they call Patty Hearst syndrome. Do you know what that is? You know who Patty Hearst was? So there's an important American magnate, Randolph Hearst, the daughter called Patty. This is in the 60s. There was a radical movement in America then called the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, extreme, extreme, extreme left. They kidnapped her. Okay, they were holding her for ransom. They wanted to use to continue their activities. Be her. You're like Patty Hearst. You had a coming out party. Your clothes come from Paris. Okay, you're captured by radicals. What do you think will happen to you?
You're gonna die.
You may die, you may be tortured or raped. Okay, they treated her nicely. They treated her okay. 3 meals a day, no rape, no, okay. She fell in love with them. So an iconic picture of that, from that era was Patty Hearst with the other members of the SDS robbing a bank. She's wearing battle fatigues and carrying a machine gun. Okay, clear? This is real. So there's a psychological phenomena that if you expect to be treated badly and you're treated less badly, you fall in love with your captors because they're so nice. Okay, like being in the bay. Okay.
This is like in the bay.
This This is like American students were captured there was Iranian students captured people in the American embassy who had a similar response. Okay, so the Jews loved everything German. The Germans are like, so they give us like, we can have any life we want. We can go to university. We can be in trade guilds. We could do anything. Isn't Germany wonderful? Aren't Germans wonderful? You understand this? Now the fact is, the Jews were not completely liberated. They still had some restrictions upon them. But it was so much better than before that they were in love with everything German. Okay, so this is very similar to what happened to Eastern European Jews when they came to America in the 1920s and 1930s. Everybody wanted to be American because it was so much better than life in Russia, Poland, whatever. So everything American was worshipped. Okay, next thing. So we're still in Middle Europe. I was saying Germany, but I mean all of Middle Europe. Okay, one of the restrictions that the Jews still had is that they were excluded from governmental offices and many universities unless they converted to Christianity. But because it was an Enlightenment society, nobody cared if they believed in Christianity or not. They just had to nominally be Christian. So what do you think the result of that was?
A bunch of Jews.
Massive fake conversions. You heard of Mendelssohn the composer? Okay. Well, if you would have, he was one of those. Okay. So another Mendelssohn entered the scene. This man's name is Moshe Mendelssohn. Do any of you know who he was? Okay. He was the founder of Reform Judaism. He meant well. His intentions were good. He was thinking so many people are converting because they want entrance to German society. And living as an observant Jew, you're closed out from German society. So we have to recreate Judaism in a way that it doesn't close you out from German society. So he himself was personally observant. He kept Shabbos, ate kosher. Okay, here's something that really says it all about Reform Judaism. The big synagogue in Berlin had an arch, and the arch said in German, "Be a person in the world and a Jew in your home," which implies that you can't be a Jew and also what? A person, okay. So that's how Reform Judaism came about. The first generation of Reform Judaism was what I've described. The second generation was strongly anti-Torah. Strongly. To the point, this is not how Reform is now. Reform improved since then. To the point men were not permitted to wear kippahs in the synagogue. Part of synagogue doctrine was to not have kosher catering, not keep Shabbos. They had services on Sunday, not Shabbos. The clergymen were dressed in the garb of Protestant clergymen. Okay. That's how it was, because they wanted everything German. So they were very strongly participant in a movement called biblical criticism. Do you know what that is? Criticizing the Torah and questioning its truth. So until then, nobody really did, because the historicity was so clear. So Bible criticism, which has a strong anti-Semitic flow to it also, would look at things like grammar and this and that, and say, oh, they must have had more than one author, or the style is much later, on the basis of very little. The agenda, which they didn't hide, I have to give them credit for that, was to discredit Torah. So one of their mottos was, keep the wheat and reject the chaff. Do you know what the chaff is? It's the outside of the wheat, like the bran. So they're saying, keep the mitzvahs that make sense to you and reject the mitzvahs that don't. Now, in order to do that, you have to say the mitzvahs aren't from God, otherwise this doesn't work philosophically. So this is where not believing in the truth of Torah began. This makes sense to you? So now I want to take us all the way back to the Dark Ages. So the Dark Ages, remember, nobody's literate, people living lives of very primitive, very violent lives. Feudalism was in full bloom. People could work from dawn to dusk, and they had to give a high percentage of their crops to their feudal masters. Okay. What were the Jews doing during the Dark Ages? So the Dark Ages didn't touch them. They were ghettoized. They lived their own lives. What mitzvah is considered amongst all the mitzvahs in the Torah the one from which all of the other mitzvot flow? Learning. Some of you have seen this in the prayer book. It says, "V'talmud Torah keneged kulam." The mitzvah of learning Torah is parallel to all the other mitzvot. Learn, ask, inquire, know. Know all of the topics that are discussed in the Talmud, which will include food, which will include business, will include pressure, like the whole world is discussed in the Talmud. Have worldly knowledge as well, but know its moral core. So in the time when the non-Jews could barely read, there were Jews like Rashi. Do you realize how discordant this is? So because of that, the contrast between the Dark Ages and the Renaissance was less great for Jews, but they still fell in love with the non-Jewish world because of the liberty that the Enlightenment brought them. This makes sense? Okay. So going back to how do you know Torah is true? So it's true historically. Here's another way to look at Torah. Now, if I were to tell you it's going to rain tomorrow at 11 o'clock, do you know today whether I'm telling the truth or not? No, but tomorrow if it rained at 11, would you know I'm telling the truth? Now, here's what you might say. Well, look, it rains a lot of times. Like, why shouldn't it rain at 11? It's a coincidence. Suppose I was able to predict not only it'll rain tomorrow at 11, but the next day, what's another natural event? The grass on the lawn will grow this much in the center and nowhere else. Every place else will not grow in the center. It'll grow this much in one day. And then I give you another few examples along this order. Would you believe me then if everything I predict came true? But only after it came true, right? Okay. So the Torah is full of prophecies. The people who received the Torah didn't believe in it on the basis of the prophecies because they hadn't yet come true. But we're living in too late a time in history to be dismissive of the prophecies. So I'm going to give you an example of one of them. Okay, Moshe tells the Jews, God will take you into Israel. You're going to prosper. When you prosper, eventually you'll become so proud, so haughty, so self-absorbed that you'll deny God. You'll forget him. You'll say, my hand and the power of my arm brought me this valor. And then you're going to be expelled from the land. Okay, have there been other nations that have been expelled from their country and retained their identity? Not really. But wait, that's not the end. You'll be expelled. And from the place in which you're forced to be, you'll return to God and you'll come back to the land. So that means not only was the exile predicted, but the return was predicted. Okay? Did that ever happen to any other group of people? No. After they returned, still predicting, you'll prosper, you'll set up your own kingdom, you'll become like the nations who surround you. You'll assimilate to them. And then they'll rise against you with unprecedented violence. And then you'll be sent out again, but for longer. And the pattern of the more you assimilate, the more violence will happen to you, will repeat again and again and again. Moshe lived how long ago? How many thousands are we talking? Close to 4,000 years ago. Could he have predicted that? I mean, you would have to say Moshe's an awfully good guesser. Boy, look at that. He predicted 2 exiles and a pattern within exile that has no parallel with other people. So I want to talk to you about the way other prejudices were compared to anti-Semitism. So let's use as an example the prejudice that America has against blacks. Okay? We'll agree that there's prejudice there? Okay. So here's the rule of thumb. When the different people are a small minority, then they're not feared and they're not hated too deeply. But when they become powerful, they're feared and people begin to hate them. Is that true?
Yes.
This is true. The hatred towards blacks when they were enslaved was much less than after the enslavement. Okay? Now, next thing. The more the smaller group becomes similar to the majority, the more they assimilate, the better they're liked. So the classic example of that is, of course, President Obama. Culturally, he's more white than I am. Could you see where this is so? He speaks the language, went to the right schools, knows how to dress. Much better than me, okay? Has the charm, the goals of the white society in which he lives. So because of that, as soon as people assimilate to the degree to which they assimilate, the majority culture accepts them. So unassimilated blacks, what's his name again? Steve, what's his name, who makes these awful violent black movies? Do you know who I mean? Whatever. There is somebody whose name escapes me right now who makes black movies about gangs, drugs, like they're all pro-gangs. And he could never be president because he promotes a culture that's very far from the majority culture. That makes sense to you? Okay. So this is true not only with blacks in America. This would be true with, let's see, where else is there prejudice that you know about? Irish people in England. When they learn how to speak the Queen's English and have professional jobs, they're okay. But if they talk like Irishmen, eat potatoes, and drink a lot at night, they're not okay. You could see this? Okay. The Jews are the exception. The more we assimilate, the more hated we become, till the point that the hatred invariably explodes. So this isn't only in Nazi Germany, where we were extremely well assimilated. Did you know this? To the point that even observant Jews invariably used German names. Nobody went around with their Jewish names. They wore the clothes, they had the language, okay? And the hatred was proportionate. This doesn't happen to anyone else. This is what happened in Spain. The Jews in Spain were Spaniards. There were Spaniards who believed in Judaism, but they were Spaniards. Okay, the hatred that rose against them was, up until that point, unprecedented. Okay, clear? So the reason I'm telling you this is the historicity of Torah has prophecies that predict this. So it's not common sense, it's not something Moshe could have figured out. This is prophetic. When you read some of the more horrible parshas at the end of Chumash Devarim, you'll see that all of the things that took place in the Holocaust are there predicted in the Torah. So I once actually saw this. We were living in a different neighborhood, and there was a small synagogue very near our house. So we had a guest from Or Sameach. The synagogue had maybe it was like actually a house that was converted to a synagogue. In the main room there were maybe like 20 men, and on the porch there were maybe 4 or 5 women. It was very small. So my husband took this guest we had, a boy from Or Sameach, who was in the synagogue. One of the people who were there, this took place around 30 years ago, was a Holocaust survivor who would say Kaddish for all of his children who had died. So this boy, with all of the tact and sensitivity of a 20-year-old from California, went over to the guy and asked him in his bad Hebrew, how do you retain faith in God when you say Kaddish for innocent children? So the guy who wasn't a rabbi, and this is why the story touched me so much, a very ordinary person, a house painter, he went right over to the bookshelf. He opened up a Chumash Devarim to the Prophecies. He said, how could I not believe in God and Torah? It's all there. He began reading it to him. And the guy was left with his jaw hanging down to his knees. So these are the prophecies. Okay, clear? There's another reason to relate to the Torah as true, besides its history, besides the prophecies, and that's that it works, which to me this speaks the loudest. Okay, so when I say that it works, it does what it says it will do. What does the Torah say it will do? What's its claim? What will it do for you?
It will bring you closer.
Bring you closer. So there are 4 different ways. There are 4 different kinds of mitzvot, and they have 4 different effects. And I want you to think this through. Some of the mitzvot improve your character. Give me an example of a mitzvah that improves your character.
Kindness.
What?
Kindness.
Kindness. No, other people also try to be kind.
Honoring your mother and father.
Honoring your parents, which also other people try to do this. I'll give you one. How about not speaking lashon hara? Other cultures don't have this. This is unique to Judaism. In fact, lashon hara is something negative and true. If something is true, no matter how negative and useless the information is and how much harm it did, it's considered fair play in the secular world. Is that true or not? Okay, how does lashon hara make your character better? Forget about your victim, just think about you, which comes so naturally anyway. Okay, yeah.
It doesn't do anything for us.
It does, and I want to tell you what it does.
It makes you concentrate on the good in people, because if you're not speaking
Yes.
about the negative people, you stop looking at it.
That's right. It changes your whole approach to life. You've all seen bitter old people, like the kinds who say, you say to them, and how are you today? And she says, how should I be? You know, that kind of person. You've seen people like that?
Yeah.
No one starts like that. There are no 5-year-olds like that. It takes like 50, 60 years of negativity to really progress to that point. So not speaking lashon hara produces a positive person. So that's that one category. Another category are mitzvot that draw you close to God by observing how much He cares about you. So this will include Shabbos and the holidays. Pick a holiday, any holiday. What? Yom Kippur. What's the point of Yom Kippur?
Repentance.
That you could be forgiven. So nothing draws you closer to God than the realization that forgiveness is possible. Otherwise you get stuck in your negative self-descriptions. This is clear? And all of the holidays have this effect. They redefine you through bringing God into your picture. Pesach tells you, no matter how desperate your situation is, everything could reverse itself. You could be a slave Monday and be free Tuesday. Shavuos tells you that there is enlightenment in the world. So Shabbos tells you you're a creation of God, you have significance, and so does everybody else. So the second category of mitzvot that change your relationship to everything through bringing God to you. Third category. There are mitzvot that keep you from wasting your life on nonsense, on false beliefs. Like what?
Idol worshiping.
Don't worship idols. Don't go for black magic. Don't do superstitious practices. How many millions of people wasted their lives on that? Does anybody know?
A lot.
Nobody can know, but they're like, my grandson was just in Thailand, so I didn't know this. The way they practice Buddhism in Thailand is that they don't worship the Buddha or meditate. All they do is feed it and take care of it. That's the way their religious practice goes. Like they polish the big Buddha images, they put food or flowers in front of it, they wash it. But it's so far from, it's so far from anything real. It's so different than other forms of Buddhism even. Other forms of Buddhism are meditative and whatever. So the reason I'm telling you this is like good people waste their lives on this. So I'm not sure you're aware of this. After he told me this, I finally got it. Tragically, in Thailand, it's a very non-moral society. It's normal, especially for people who live in small villages, to bring up their daughters to be prostitutes. That their goal in life from when they're young is like, you'll make a lot of money, men are going to pay a lot for you, you're beautiful. So now I got it. I never knew where this was coming from. It's coming from they're not feeling that there's any higher force or accountability. Okay, so it's tragic, and it's not, like the Torah doesn't let you go there. Okay, last kind of mitzvot are mitzvot that give you the means of elevating physical experience so that you're not living two lives, your physical life and your spiritual life, which is, in my opinion, the biggest problem of Christianity. The person who you are in church doesn't even from their perspective have to have much to do with who you are on Tuesday. Okay, there are no mitzvot. So mitzvot that concern eating, drinking, business, your personal life when you're married, everything is touched and everything is elevated. So Torah is the only system that really does these four things. So it would do you good to think this through. Okay, do you have any questions on the truth of Torah? Going once, twice. Okay, that's it for today.